The train came in at 2:30 on a Thursday, which was the worst possible time in Harland Creek, because the feed store let out at 2, and the men who had nothing urgent left to do spent the hour between 2 and 3 on the bench in front of it. There were 6 of them that afternoon. They watched the platform the way men in small towns watch anything that interrupts the sameness of a day. She stepped off last, not because she had been hesitating, though she had, because she had spent the last 400 miles talking herself into a posture she could hold, and she needed one more breath of train air before she traded it for whatever was waiting on the other side of the door. She was 27. Her hair was brown, pulled back in the practical way of a woman who has learned not to invite comment. Her dress was gray-blue, not new, clean. She carried a single bag, and she carried it herself. The platform was not empty. She stood at the edge of it and looked down the main street of Harland Creek, Texas, and took in what she'd agreed to. A narrow road, a general store with a cracked awning, a livery at the far end with the doors standing open, a sky the color of old bone. It had not rained in 11 weeks. She could tell without being told. The dust was a particular shade of pale, almost white, and it lay on everything with the patience of something that expected to stay. The ground between the buildings had cracked in a pattern she would learn to read later. Shallow lines near the surface, deeper rifts farther out, a whole vocabulary of thirst written into the earth. She was looking at that when he crossed the street. He was tall and moved without hurrying, which was different from moving slowly. He wore a plain work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his hat was pushed back slightly in a way that suggested he had forgotten it rather than arranged it. He looked like a man who had been outside for most of his adult life. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been trying to correctly estimate. She looked back. "Miss," he said. It was not a question exactly. It was a word that acknowledged she was standing there and that he had come for her. "Yes," she said. He reached for the bag. She did not let go immediately. Not because she was refusing, but because she was still deciding. He waited. His hand was on the handle and hers was on the strap, and neither of them moved for a moment that was slightly longer than comfortable. She let go. He said, "The wagon's at the livery." She followed him off the platform and into the white dust of Harland Creek. And behind her, from the bench in front of the feed store, she heard the low sound of men beginning to talk. The wagon was a working thing. No cushion on the seat, no paint left on the side panels. A water barrel lashed to the back with rope that had been knotted and re-knotted until the knots themselves had knots. She climbed up without waiting for him to offer a hand. He noticed that. He went around to the other side and climbed up and took the reins, and they moved out of Harland Creek without speaking. The land opened up almost immediately. One moment there were storefronts and a dog sleeping in a doorway, and the sound of the smithy, and then there was nothing but flat earth and sky, and the road pressing west through grass the color of old straw. The drought had been at it for 2 seasons. She could see it in the way the ground cracked along the margins of the road. Long, dry seams like the land was trying to split open and let something out. She looked at it without flinching. He drove and did not look at her, which she appreciated. She had expected something, questions or that particular variety of polite attention that was really just inspection, dressed up in manners. He gave her neither. He watched the road. He adjusted the reins when one of the horses pulled slightly left. He was comfortable in the silence the way people are comfortable in a place they have spent a long time. After a while, she said, "How far?" "Hour and a half," he said. "Maybe 2 if the back wheel decides to give me trouble again." She looked at the back wheel. It had a wobble to it, slight but consistent, like a sentence with the wrong word in it. "Has it given you trouble before?" she said. "Twice this month," he said. She considered that. "You know what's wrong with it." "Yes," he said. She waited. "Haven't had time to fix it," he said. And there was nothing apologetic in the way he said it. Just a statement of fact. The way you'd describe the weather. She looked back at the road. The grass on either side was short and brittle, and the sky above it was the kind of pale blue that meant heat without relief. In the distance, so far off it might have been imagination, there was a line of darker color along the horizon. Cloud, or maybe just haze. She had left Missouri 4 days ago with one trunk and a sewing basket her mother had given her the winter before she died. The sewing basket was in the trunk, and the trunk was in the wagon bed, and she had not looked at it since the porter loaded it at the station in St. Louis. She did not look at it now. She looked at the cracked earth instead, the way it spread out from the road's edge in long, pale lines. She was already thinking about water. The town appeared before she expected it to. One moment there was only the pale road and the brittle grass and the sky pressing down without mercy, and then the wagon rounded a low rise, and there it was. A main street of perhaps 8 buildings, a water tower at the far end, a church without a steeple. The wood on most of the storefronts had gone gray from sun. A dog crossed the street at the near end and disappeared between 2 buildings without looking up. He guided the wagon down the center of it, and she sat straight and looked ahead. A woman on the general store's porch stopped sweeping. A man adjusting something in the doorway of the livery paused with his hands still raised. 2 children sitting on a step watched the wagon pass with the particular attention children give to anything they have been told not to stare at. She kept her chin level. She had known there would be watching. There had been watching at every stop since St. Louis, at the platform in Kansas City, at the way station outside Abilene where she'd eaten cold bread and said nothing to the couple across the table who kept glancing at her satchel like it might explain her. Being looked at did not cost her anything. She had decided that before she left. He pulled up in front of a building that was narrower than the others. A hardware sign, weathered nearly to blank. He set the brake and climbed down without ceremony, and she climbed down herself before he came around to her side. He did not comment on that. The trunk he lifted from the wagon bed without asking whether she wanted help with it, which was different from presuming. He carried it to the door and set it down and unlocked the door and carried it through. She followed with the sewing basket. Inside it was dim and smelled of sawdust and iron and something else, older. The smell of a space that had been used hard for a long time. There was a counter along the left wall, empty shelves behind it. Through a doorway at the back she could see a table, 2 chairs, a window with the shade pulled. He set the trunk near the wall. "There's a room through the back," he said. "You'd have it to yourself." She looked at the window. The shade was yellowed at the edges. "And the arrangement," she said. The advertisement said a farm. "House and 40 acres," he said. 3 miles east. "Who's been working it?" "No one," he said. "Since last spring." She set the sewing basket on the counter. "Show me tomorrow," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not assessing, not unkind. The way you look at a door you're not sure will hold. "All right," he said. He went out to tend the horse, and she stood in the dim room alone. And through the window the pale sky was beginning, very slowly, to go orange. She slept in her clothes, not from exhaustion, though there was that. From habit, the habit of a woman who had spent the last 2 months in places where to sleep could end badly, and who had not yet decided whether this was one of them. The room was small. A cot, a washstand, a hook on the wall where someone had left a length of old rope, for no purpose she could determine. The window faced east. When the light came, it came all at once, flat and white and without apology. She was up before it fully arrived. She found the pump in the yard behind the building and washed her face and hands. The water was cold enough to make her breath catch. She dried on her sleeve. There was no one else awake on the street yet, just a dog moving along the opposite boardwalk with its nose down and the distant sound of a rooster somewhere past the livery. She went back inside and opened the sewing basket and took inventory. Needles, 3 cards of thread, black, brown, a faded blue, a small pair of shears, a folded square of cloth she had been meaning to him for 2 months. Everything accounted for. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps, the sound of water, the pump handle working, the same catch of cold she had felt an hour earlier. Then boots on the back step. He came in with his hair damp and a cup in each hand. He set one on the counter near her. He did not ask if she wanted it. He did not comment on the fact that she was already awake and dressed, and had apparently reorganized her belongings in the night. He went and stood at the window with the second cup and looked out at the street. She picked up the cup. "When did the last rain come?" she said. "March," he said. "Early March." She thought about that. It was now late July. And before that. "Fall," he said. What fell in fall wasn't enough. She held the cup in both hands. The coffee was strong enough that it had its own weight. "Is the well good?" she said. "So far. The 40 acres. What's the soil?" He turned from the window. Not because the question surprised him, but as if he wanted to answer it with some accuracy, and that required looking at her. "Clay under," he said. "Some topsoil left in the lower quarter. The rest has gone to crust." She nodded. "I'll want to see the lower quarter first," she said. Something shifted in his face. Small, not quite readable. Not relief, precisely. More like the recognition that a thing he had expected to be difficult might not be. He drained the cup. "Horse'll be ready in an hour," he said. She turned back to the sewing basket. "I'll be here," she said. The lower quarter sat at the far end of the property where the land tilted slightly north and the runoff from the higher ground collected in the dry seasons into nothing, and in the wet seasons into something that could briefly be called promise. She rode behind him on the buckboard without speaking. The road was dust from the gate to the far fence line, pale and fine as ash, and it rose around the wheels and settled on everything it touched. The sky was white at its edges, not clouded, simply exhausted. He stopped the horse at the slope's edge, and they both looked down. The lower quarter was brown, but a different brown than the rest. Where the upper fields had gone the color of an old brick, crumbling at the surface, this section held a darker tone. Something still present underneath, still waiting. A few weeds had survived along the fence post nearest the dry creek bed, She noted them. She climbed down before he could offer a hand. She walked to the middle of the section and crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. It resisted at the surface but gave beneath. She pressed deeper. When she pulled her hand back, a small amount of earth came with it, clinging to her fingers. She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger and looked at what it left. He had stayed with the horse. She walked the perimeter without hurrying. She stopped twice, once near the creek bed, once at the northeast corner where something had grown and gone to dry stalk. She leaned down and broke the stalk at its base and looked at the root. When she came back to the buckboard, her fingers were still dark with the soil. "There's moisture 3 inches down," she said. He said nothing. "The creek bed, how far does it run before it hits the main channel?" "Quarter mile, maybe a little less." She looked back toward it. "If it rained 2 inches in the next month, would it flow?" "1.5 would do it." She nodded slowly. "The soil's not gone. It's just been left to seal over." She wiped her hand against her skirt. "If you break the crust before any rain comes, you give it somewhere to go when it does." He looked at the field. "That's assuming rain comes." "It comes," she said. "It always comes eventually." She said it without sentiment, the way a person states something they have observed enough times that opinion no longer enters into it. He turned to look at her. She was still watching the field. "The upper sections," she said. "Are any of them fallow?" "The northwest 20. "For how long?" "2 seasons." She turned back toward the buckboard. "I'd like to see it before we head back." He reached down and offered his hand for the step up. She took it without remark. The northwest 20 sat higher than the rest, where the land lifted slightly before flattening again toward the ridge. The soil there was lighter in color, not pale the way exhausted ground goes pale, but the particular gray tan of earth that has been resting. No crust on this section. The wind had kept it loose. She stepped down before he had stopped the buckboard fully. He watched her walk the edge of it, her skirt hem picking up the fine dust. She moved at a measured pace, not hurrying, stopping every 8 or 10 feet to crouch and take a handful of soil. She let it fall between her fingers each time. He stayed with the horse. After the 4th stop, she stood and looked back at him. This ground would take seed. He crossed his arms on the buckboard rail. "It's too dry to germinate anything. It's dry on top." She crouched again, this time pressing the flat of her palm down and pushing. "There's give under the surface." She looked up at him. "If you disc this now and plant shallow, you catch whatever comes. Even a 1/2 inch would move it. A 1/2 inch doesn't plant a crop." "No." She stood. "But it starts one." He got down from the buckboard and walked to where she was standing. He crouched the way she had and pressed his palm against the earth. He felt it. Not moisture exactly, but the absence of the rigid hardness the lower sections had. Some give, some latency in it. He stayed crouched for a moment. "You've worked this kind of ground before." It was not quite a question. "My father farmed dry land in Kansas," she said. "Before the ground there went the same way." She paused. "We planted the fallow sections last. By the time we got to them, we'd already seen what worked." "Did it work?" She looked at the field rather than at him. "Enough of it." He stood. The afternoon light had gone flat and long, the kind of light that makes distances hard to judge. The ridge looked closer than it was. The disc harrow's blade is cracked. he said. Can it be welded? Needs a new tooth, not just a weld? How long to get one? Fremont's might have the part. Otherwise, I'd have to order from Abilene. He looked at the sky in the way of a man doing arithmetic. 10 days, if I'm lucky. She nodded, still watching the field. There was something in her posture. Not impatience, not satisfaction. More like a person who has calculated ahead and is now simply waiting for the present moment to catch up. The lower sections first, she said. Break the crust there. Give them a chance before any rain hits. She turned. By the time you have the tooth, this ground will still be here. He picked up the reins. We'll head back, he said. She climbed up without the offered hand this time. He noticed. He said nothing. The ride back was quiet in the way work makes things quiet. Not empty, but used up. The horse moved at its own pace, and neither of them hurried it. She watched the land from the wagon's seat. The sections they had covered that morning lay behind them, turned and dark against the pale, untouched ground. From above, if a person could have seen it, it would have looked like a hem being let down. The edge of something new just beginning to show. He pulled up at Fremont's on the way through town. She waited in the wagon. A woman by the mercantile looked over once and then away, the way people do when they have already decided what they are looking at. She sat level and waited. He came out in 4 minutes. He climbed up, gathered the reins, and did not speak until they had cleared the main street. He thinks he can get the tooth by Thursday. Thursday was 6 days. She did the arithmetic the same way he had. She felt it rather than counted it. Good, she said. At the house, she went in ahead of him. The kitchen still held the heat of noon. She went to the window over the basin and opened it, and the air that came in smelled of dry grass and something faintly green underneath it. So faint she was not certain she had not invented it. She started the stove. He came in behind her, stopped at the doorway longer than usual, then crossed to the table and sat down with his hat still on. She took 2 cups from the shelf. He did not take his hat off until she set the coffee in front of him. He set it on the table beside the cup, brim down. They did not talk through most of it. She stood at the window with her cup, and Ruru sat with his, and the silence was the kind that has weight to it, not comfortable, not uncomfortable. Present. You know this kind of ground, he said finally. She turned just enough to answer without turning fully. My father farmed clay, west of the Brazos. Ground like this breaks your heart before it gives you anything. He was quiet. But it gives, she said. That's the thing about it. Once it decides to. She said it to the window. He did not respond, and she did not expect him to. Later, when the supper was done and the dishes cleared, she found him on the porch with the battered notebook he kept field records in. He was writing something, and she did not look at what. She went back inside and left him to it. She could see the lamp through the window, his shadow bending over the page. She sat down at the table. She put her hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Then she reached for her mending. 3 days after that conversation, she found the notebook on the table, not left carelessly. Set there, turned to a specific page. She knew the difference. She stood in the kitchen with her hands still damp from the morning wash, and looked at it without touching it. The page was open to a rough sketch, field lines, contour marks, a column of figures along the margin. She recognized the south field in the shape of it. The low corners he had plowed twice without result. She did not sit down. She read it standing, the way you read something you might need to set aside quickly. He had written measurements she recognized, furrow spacing, the grade of the slope in rough estimation. And below that, a single line in different ink, added after, the pen pressed harder than the rest. Breaks your heart before it gives you anything. Her words. He had written her words into his field records. She heard him come in from the barn. She did not move from where she stood, and he came into the kitchen and saw her standing over the notebook and did not say anything. He crossed to the basin and washed his hands. She listened to the water. "I've been thinking about the drainage," she said. "I know. If you cut a shallow channel here," she pointed to the low corner without picking the book up, and ran it northeast toward the back fence line. The water has somewhere to go when the rains come heavy. It stops sitting. He dried his hands, came to stand beside her and look at the page, close enough that she could hear him breathe. "That's rocky ground up that way," he said. 4, 5 inches down. After that, it softens. He was quiet for a moment. "You've walked that fence line." "Last week." He looked at the sketch. She watched his eyes move over it the way a man's eyes move over ground he is responsible for. Slowly, with the kind of attention that costs something. "The grade would have to carry it," he said. "It will. I walked it twice." He nodded once. Not agreement exactly. More like a door opening an inch. He pulled out the chair and sat down, and she remained standing, and for a few minutes they both looked at the page without speaking. Then he picked up the pencil and drew a faint line where she had indicated, following the shape of the land as she'd described it. She watched his hand. The line was tentative, exploratory. The kind of mark a man makes when he is not yet certain but is willing to begin. She reached over and moved his line slightly, a degree, maybe 2, where the grade would carry better. Her finger touched the page just at the edge of where his pencil had stopped. He looked at where she'd pointed. Then he redrew the line. They worked like that for another hour. She brought out the second sketch, the one she'd made of the lower field, where the clay ran hard and the water pooled instead of moving. He studied it longer than the first. She did not fill the silence. 2 channels, he said finally. Not one. She had drawn one. She looked at his reasoning and saw it immediately. The single channel would slow before the field's end and back up in wet season. 2, she agreed. He made a mark. She adjusted it by a fraction. He looked at her adjustment and made another mark that accounted for what she had changed. It was like a conversation neither of them was speaking aloud. The lamp burned lower. She got up without asking and trimmed it, and the light held steady. He watched her do it the way a man watches something efficient and does, not comment because commenting would reduce it. By the time they finished, the table held 4 pages. Her original sketches and his additions, the pencil lines crossing and reinforcing each other until you could not have separated whose thinking was whose. He sat back. His hands rested flat on the table, the pencil between 2 fingers. She stacked the pages with care, squaring the edges. "It'll take most of the summer," he said. "Yes, and we'll need to borrow the neighbor's team for the heavy cuts." "I know." He looked at her then, not the quick, redirected look he used when he caught himself watching her, but a direct one. Steady. She met it. "You knew all this before you drew it," he said. She didn't answer right away. Outside, something shifted in the wind. A cedar branch, maybe, brushing the eave. "I knew enough," she said. I needed to know if you'd look." He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he looked down at the pages. She understood that this was not deflection. It was something he needed to do. Return to the practical, to the ground beneath the feeling. Because the feeling was larger than the room, and they were both still learning its dimensions. She did not push past it. She gathered the sketches and held them against her chest. "I'll make a clean copy tomorrow," she said. "In case the rain comes and these blur. They won't blur. They might. Then make a clean copy." She almost smiled. She turned toward the shelf to set the pages down, and he did not move. But she felt his attention on her back the way you feel weather coming. Not as threat, not as warmth exactly, but as a change in pressure, as a shift in what the air between two people is carrying. She set the pages on the shelf beneath the window. The lamp burned on. The rain came 3 days later. Not the false kind. The kind that moved through fast and left the ground harder than before. This was different. It arrived before dawn, quiet at first, tapping the window glass the way a careful person knocks. She lay still and listened to it build. By the time the sky was pale enough to see by, it was raining in earnest, steady and unhurried. And the smell that came through the gap under the door was the smell of the earth opening. She rose before he did. She went to the shelf and took down the sketches. The paper was dry. She set them on the table and looked at them in the gray morning light. The channels she had drawn, the low berm along the eastern edge, the way the slope could be read if you trusted the ground to show you where water wanted to go. She heard him in the lean-to, pulling on his boots. When he came through, he stopped at the window first. He stood there a moment with one hand on the frame, watching the rain come down across the field. She could not see his face. She did not need to. "It's holding," he said. "It is." He turned and looked at the sketches on the table. He came over and stood beside her, and they both looked down at the pages in silence. His shoulder was close enough to hers that she was aware of the space between them, the way you are aware of the edge of something. "The berm," he said. "If we do it before the ground softens too much." "Today?" He nodded. He was already thinking through the sequence, she could tell. The order of the work, what needed to happen first. This was how he processed things, sequentially. She had learned to read it not as distance, but as attention directed inward, toward the problem, toward the shape of what needed doing. She went to put the coffee on. He was already outside by the time it had brewed, moving across the wet ground toward the eastern edge of the field. She watched him from the doorway, her cup in both hands. The rain had slowed to something even and fine, and the light was coming up slowly behind the low clouds. He stopped at the place she had marked on the sketch, the lowest point of the natural grade, where water would collect if it had somewhere to go. He stood there looking at the ground the way he looked at things he was about to commit to. Still, measuring something she couldn't see from the doorway. She set down her cup. She went inside and put on her boots. When she came back out, she took the second-handled spade from where it leaned against the fence post and walked toward him across the wet grass without calling out. He heard her coming before he saw her. The sound of boots on wet grass, the particular rhythm of her step. He did not turn around. She came to stand beside him, a foot to his left, the spade handle resting against her shoulder. She looked at what he was looking at. The ground here was darker than the surrounding earth, A slight depression worn smooth over years of rain, finding the same path and going nowhere. She had marked it correctly. He crouched down and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. It gave, soft all the way through, and when he pulled his hand back, the impression held its shape. She crouched beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, quietly, more to himself than to her, 8 feet to the rock shelf, maybe 10. She looked at where the grade fell away to the south. If the channel runs along the low side here and bends at the fence line, then gravity does the work, he said. She nodded once. He stood. She stood. He took 4 paces south, stopped, turned and looked back at the house, then at the sky, then at the field. She watched him do it. He was reading the land the way she had read her sketch. Not to find what he wanted, but to find what was actually there. He came back and picked up the second spade from where she'd rested it upright in the soft ground. They started at the mark she had made with a stick the evening before, just a small notch in the grass that had survived the rain. He broke the first sod, she broke the second. They worked in a line, moving south along the natural grade, turning earth in a steady, alternating rhythm that was not planned, but fell into itself after the first few minutes. The rain continued, fine and even. It made the work cooler, but not cold. After a while, she noticed they had stopped being 2 people working near each other and had become something else. Something that moved with the same economy, turned at the same intervals, stopped at the same moments to assess the line they were cutting. She did not remark on it. She kept working. The light came up slowly. The clouds held but thinned toward the east, and the color of the air changed from gray to something closer to pale gold. He stopped. She stopped a half-second after him. He was looking at the trench they had cut, perhaps 15 feet, still shallow, but true to the grade. The water from the morning's rain was already beginning to find the lowest point of it and sit there, waiting. She watched it too. "It'll hold," he said. She didn't answer. She was already measuring the next section with her eye, calculating the bend. They worked the bend together, adjusting the angle twice before it sat right. The water would need a place to turn without losing momentum, and getting that angle wrong would undo everything behind it. He watched how she read the ground, not guessing, but following something she could see that he had to take on faith until the water showed him. She was right. She was right. The flow gathered in the elbow of the trench and moved on south just the way it was supposed to. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped. The clouds stayed, flat and pale, and the air held the particular stillness that follows weather. They worked another hour in that quiet, extending the line toward the lower field, where the corn had come in sparse the last 2 seasons. Neither spoke much. When they needed to coordinate, they used short words or no words, a gesture, a direction of the chin, a pause that the other read correctly and matched. He drove the last stake himself. She stood back and looked at the full length of what they had cut, 40 feet of shallow trench, true to the grade, already dark with held water along its floor. She said, "Give it 1 dry week and we'll see." He nodded. They walked back toward the house together, tools over their shoulders, boots heavy with mud. The boy was at the window. He had been there most of the morning, watching in the particular way children watch, when they understand something is happening that they will remember. He did not wave, he just watched them come. She set her tools against the porch rail and sat on the step to pull off her boots. He did the same. For a moment they sat side by side in the gray morning light, not talking, looking out at the field. The trench was not visible from here. The land was flat enough and the cut shallow enough that it vanished into the ordinary brown of the earth. But she knew where it was. She could see the line of it in her mind with precision. He put his hand flat on the step between them, not reaching, not asking, just there, on the worn wood, near her own hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set her hand on top of his. Neither of them said anything. The clouds moved slowly overhead. Somewhere behind the house, the chickens had started up again, ordinary and indifferent. The boy was still at the window. That was all. In 3 weeks, the lower field showed green farther south than it ever had. By harvest, the trench had been extended twice. Once by him, once by her while he was repairing the fence line on the north end. They did not plan it that way. It simply happened that way, which was how most things between them went.